We do have a couple members that are coming and going today, so if you see people moving in and out, it's not that they're being rude, but there are other meetings going on today. So today is a committee for informational hearing. The testimony will be heard from our invited speakers. Former Supreme Court Justice Mike Gableman, thank you for coming in today. If everybody can just check their phones quickly, make sure that we don't have any interruptions, we'd appreciate that. And with that, Justice Gableman, the floor is yours.
Chairman Branchin and members of the committee, I am delighted to be back before you. I would like to take some time to update you on the latest news relative to my investigation and then take whatever questions you may have, with the understanding that I have been allotted 1 hour for today's meeting and that my schedule today requires me to adhere to that time limit. The first topic I'd like to discuss is subpoenas that my office has issued and lawsuits that have been filed. Not long ago, my office drafted a series of subpoenas demanding certain documents and testimony from government officials who helped administer the November 2020 election. The Speaker of the Assembly signed those subpoenas and they were duly served. Those subpoenas were issued to the Wisconsin Election Commission, the mayors of Green Bay, Milwaukee, Kenosha, Racine, and Madison. That is, the 5 cities that together took an aggregate of around $9 million from the Zuckerberg Foundation in exchange for ceding some of their authority to administer that election. I issued similar subpoenas for the municipal clerks of those 5 cities. In response, I received straightforward cooperation from the city of Kenosha and little or no cooperation from Madison, Milwaukee, Racine, and Green Bay. After those subpoenas were served, Josh Call, the current Attorney General of our state, filed a lawsuit against Speaker Voss, Chairman Branchin, and my office, in which he has asked the court to prohibit me from asking any questions of Megan Wolf, who is the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. In response to this lawsuit, Speaker Voss has had to hire attorneys, as has Chairman Branchin and myself. Like Josh Call and his hundreds of lawyers, all of our lawyers are being paid by the taxpayers. Oral argument is set on that matter before the court in Madison on December 23rd. On this past Monday, November 29, I filed 2 petitions for writs of attachment in the Circuit Court for Waukesha County against the mayors of Green Bay and Madison, Eric Genrich and Satya Rhodes Conway. I did so because of all the clerks and of all the mayors, those 2 simply failed without reason or excuse to appear for their depositions and answer questions about how and to what extent they allowed Mark Zuckerberg's employees to plan and administer their city's election in November 2020. This is a significant area of inquiry because undisputed news reports tell us that Mr. Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan, spent a total of roughly $500 million to defeat incumbent President Donald Trump and elect the current President Joe Biden. Reasonable minds might wonder whether the millions of dollars each of these mayors received from the Zuckerbergs may have induced them to do something other than treat all candidates fairly and impartially, and whether those mayors used the Zuckerberg money to get out the vote for Joe Biden. These questions have been left unasked by a suddenly incurious press. Rather, the state's largest and once respected but now rapidly failing newspaper has taken up the partisan cause of unlawful electioneering by shielding from accountability potential wrongdoing by government officials. Eric Genrich and Satya Rhodes Conway have chosen to ignore the subpoenas issued by the Wisconsin Assembly because they have no intention of answering uncomfortable questions about how they ran their elections and what they did with the millions of dollars Zuckerberg money they took. The court date for the hearing on my petition is December 22, 2021. Rather than be held accountable for his partisan efforts, Mayor Genrich has chosen to hire 3 law firms who, it is reported, have donated their services. All 3 law firms who are donating thousands and thousands of dollars worth of free legal services to Eric Genrich in the city of Green Bay share his partisanship. Whatever costs are born of this cover-up will, again, be paid for by the taxpayers. Let's talk about cover-ups, because that is exactly what the Wisconsin Election Commission, its administrator Megan Wolf, and Mayors Genrich and Rhodes Conway are engaging in. They are trying to run and hide from accountability to the citizens they are supposed to serve. Why go through all this legal evasion, maneuvering, and expense unless they do not want the public to know what they have done? There are different levels of proof in our United States legal system. The lowest is the reasonable articulable suspicion standard. The medium is probable cause, more likely than not, or in other words, probably. The highest, of course, is beyond a reasonable doubt. This investigation is not concluded, and so therefore I make no findings. I can make no findings beyond a reasonable doubt. However, what is looking like what probably happened here is the implementation of a plan that was articulated very well and very succinctly in this book by David Plouffe, A Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. In it, David Plouffe, who is the former political director for former President Obama and is currently an employee of the Zuckerbergs, he wrote in the summer of 2019. Now, the reporters who will no doubt check this book out will say it was published in 2020, but when you read the book, he tells us he was writing in the summer of 2019. Mr. Plouffe tells us that it is likely that in the 2020 election, Wisconsin will become a political war zone. A political war zone. He writes as follows: the contest for the presidency may come down to a block-by-block street fight in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee. And so it was. Mr. Plouffe, after serving as President Obama's political director, went to work for Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg then set aside, according to all media accounts, roughly $500 million, $500 million, to defeat Donald Trump and to put David Plouffe's block-by-block political war zone into effect. Enter an organization commonly referred to as CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life. Center for Tech and Civil Life, headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, since its inception and the beginning of its existence, had a yearly budget of around $1 million. With the infusion of Zuckerberg cash, it suddenly had around $300 million. They then approached the 5 biggest Democratic cities in the state: Racine, Kenosha, Milwaukee, Madison, and Green Bay. They said they were going to offer money to keep people safe from COVID. But somewhere along the way that changed. As soon as the cities took the initial payouts of $10,000 each, except for the city of Racine and their mayor, Corey Mason, who spearheaded the effort to coordinate with the Zuckerberg agents. City of Racine took a $50,000 cut. I don't know technically what it was called, finder's fee or initiation fee, but they got $50,000 and the other cities got $10,000 each. Somewhere along the way, the plan from CTCL relative to those 5 cities changed from the stated purpose of keeping people safe from COVID. And this is not just my opinion. We look at the record to see how much money was actually spent on COVID safety measures. And we see it as it pales in comparison with the amount of the Get Out the Vote effort. Now, Get Out the Vote has historically been a partisan term of art. Get out the vote is short for get out the vote for a particular candidate for office. The 5 cities then took the remainder of the roughly $8.8 million that Mark Zuckerberg was giving away, and under CTCL's contractual provisions were required to get out the vote. I think the citizens of this state have a right to know whether that was done on a partisan basis and or for partisan purposes, and what, if any, partisan effect it had in those cities. These are reasonable questions in light of the roadmap that was set out for all to see in the David Plouffe book, A Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. David Plouffe, who then went to work for Mark Zuckerberg, who then Mark Zuckerberg distributes $300 million for these efforts, $500 in total to defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden, but $300 million for these plans across the country to get out the vote in different cities, including Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, Green Bay, and Milwaukee, if I didn't say Milwaukee. You know, the last time I was here, the only questions I received from Eric Genrich and Sadia Rhodes Conway's advocates on this committee were in regard to the identities of the personnel who work with me. I must note that in keeping my pledge to reach out to all members of this committee, I called Representative Spreitzer, even after he tweeted that in his opinion I am not worth a phone call. I asked him to sit down and meet with me to talk all of these issues over. He refused my offer, which tells me everything I need to know about whose side he's on, and it isn't the side of the average citizen. At least he was upfront, in contrast to Representative Subek, who accepted my offer to visit, but then simply absented not only herself from her office at the appointed hour, but also her entire staff as well. I waited in the hallway for 20 minutes. Representative Emerson said she'd think about my offer, and I'm still waiting to hear back. This is worth mentioning because the commonality of Eric Genrich, Sadia Rhodes Conway, Mark Spreitzer, Lisa Subek, and Jody Emerson is that in November 2020, they all wanted Donald Trump to lose and Joe Biden to win. And they have no interest in exposing themselves or each other's wrongdoing to public accountability. My office has continued to investigate cases of elder abuse throughout the state, which resulted from WEC's self-admitted illegal conduct of exposing our most vulnerable citizens, residents of nursing homes and continuing care facilities, to abuse and manipulation for partisan gain. Understandably, this issue has generated much public interest, and although once again the state's largest and once well-respected but now failing newspaper has disparaged investigation efforts into this story, neither I nor anyone in my office will be deterred from continuing to meet with victims of this insidious abuse. And we will hold those government officials responsible for this grotesque abuse accountable to the public they are supposed to serve. The next issue I'd like to talk about is attacks on my office. The attacks on my office that have come mainly from one source, as well as from others who are on this committee, that after being given proof that the Wisconsin Election Commission has been committing on a long-standing basis systematic illegalities, Representative Spreitzer's first question to me concerned the identities of the people I work with. The articles that came from that hearing focused, sadly but unsurprisingly, on that line of questioning. I am now prepared to give my response. The following individuals work or have worked for my office. Mike Gableman, July 1 through present, with a salary of $11,000 per month, former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice from New Berlin, Wisconsin, in charge of staffing and overseeing the employees during the investigation into the November 2020 election and elections from January 1, 2020, paying particular attention to the specific election. Zachary Nemirovich, who's sitting to my right, September 1 through present, with a salary of $4,000 per month, graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a degree in human resources. Handles office administration tasks such as scheduling, note-taking, purchasing equipment, reimbursement claims, and many other similar and important tasks. Attorney Andrew Kloster, September 1 through present, with a salary of $5,000 per month, currently practicing law in the greater Washington, D.C. area, currently serving as Chief of Staff for the Wisconsin Special Counsel, provides legal work for the office. Attorney Carol Mathias, September 1 through present, with a salary of $5,000 per month. Practices law in the state of California. provides legal services and oversight for the office while assisting the investigation team with everything they need. Mr. Gary Waite, September 1 through November 1, with a salary of $3,250 per month. Worked as an investigator for the Wisconsin Special Counsel, conducted interviews, collected, sorted, and processed information, and other leads. Mr. Ron Hoyer, October 1 through present, with a salary of $3,250 per month, currently the president of the Wisconsin Voters Alliance, working as an investigator for the Wisconsin Special Counsel, specializing in the nursing home and elder abuse issues. Attorney Clint Lancaster, seated to my left, November 1 through present, with a salary of $10,000 per month, currently practicing law in the state of Arkansas. He provides legal assistance and document review for the Wisconsin Special Counsel. He assists the office with planning, strategy, and all aspects of anticipated litigation. Thomas Obregon, November 1 through present, with an hourly wage of $40 per hour, a retired Milwaukee Police Department detective, currently serving as the lead investigator for the Wisconsin Special Counsel, providing detectives with oversight and other guidance. Neil Saxton, November 1 through November 21, with an hourly wage of $40 per hour, former Milwaukee Police Department detective, assisted with witness interviews and interview reports, sorted through open records received. Edward Haim, CHAIM, November 27 through present, with an hourly wage of $40 per hour, retired Milwaukee Police Department detective. He assists with witness interview and interview reports. He helps to schedule meeting times with witnesses and follow up on reported leads. There is one person whose identity I will continue to keep classified, November 1 through present, with an hourly wage of $40 per hour. His identity is to be kept confidential because, at this time, in order to protect his best interests with his full-time employer. There is nothing improper or irregular about his service. However, for personnel reasons, I find it more prudent not to reveal his identity. He is currently a data expert for the investigation team and creates timeline spreadsheets and other collating services and processes for our office. Subleases. A couple of weeks ago, I reported to the chief clerk of the Assembly that I had entered into sublease agreements with the Thomas More Society and the law firm who represents the Wisconsin Voters Alliance. The purpose of the sublease is to save taxpayer money. Finding temporary office space for an unknown period of time in order to accommodate an unpredictable number of staff is difficult and expensive. I did not have access to any state building or office resources. I had to go out and find it myself. And I do treat the taxpayer money as if it is my own by being prudent and cautious with it. I know how hard the people who earn it work for it. And that goes into every decision I make. To that end, I found the least expensive office space with the maximum flexibility, so that if this investigation were forced to shut down prior to the conclusion of the one-year lease, taxpayers would not be stuck with the bill. Money spent. On August 30, 2021, the Assembly appropriated a budget for this office of $676,000, a number based on a projected operational lifespan of roughly 3 or 4 months. So far, we have spent the following amounts. July through September 30th, Mike Gableman's salary, $33,000. Office staff salary, $17,250. Office rent, $4,351. Office supplies, $2,567. Travel costs, including lodging, of $3,861, mileage and other transportation, $3,540, flight costs, $630, meals while traveling, $400. The total for September was $65,000. October A similar amount, my monthly salary, $11,000, office staff salary, $21,000, office rent, $2,500, supplies, $3,250, hotel, $2,355, flight, $1,045, mileage and transportation, $2,251, travel meals, $142. A total for the month of October, $43,500. November, my salary, $11,000, office staff salary, $36,000, office rent, $2,500, office supplies, $7,000, and we have to estimate the rest because as I was preparing this, the final wasn't ready, but it looks like it's going to be estimated hotel costs of $5,000, estimated flight costs of $2,500, mileage and transportation of $2,000, travel meals of $400, for an estimated total of $67,000. The grand total for that is $175,500 spent out of the $676,000 that was appropriated. Open records requests. I am now in the process of locating and reviewing each potentially responsive record correlative to the corporations that have been requesting certain records. Those records will be posted by the close of business this coming Friday, December 3rd, 2021. I will wait until the conclusion of this investigation when my final report is delivered to the Assembly before I disclose any record whose disclosure might reasonably compromise the integrity of this investigation if released prior to its conclusion. But if the integrity of the investigation will not be compromised, those open records will go out. Now, to that end, yesterday it was reported by the paper and reporter who I've already referred to several things. One is an implication that I met with Dick Uihlein. Mr. Uihlein and his wife apparently own the Uihlein Corporation. I have never met with and I have never spoken with Mr. or Mrs. Uihlein. And not to the best of my recollection, have I ever spoken with either one. I certainly have not spoken with either one about any matter, not that it would be improper if I had. I'll meet with Joe Biden. I'll meet with anyone the Democrats want to send. I'll be happy to meet with them. I'll meet with the Brennan Center of Justice, so-called. I went to the Uihlein headquarters only because it was located in Pleasant Prairie, and I had to meet somebody in Pleasant Prairie who is unaffiliated with the Uihlein Corporation to get a clerical matter done and a document signed. It had nothing to do with the Uihlein Center itself. Now, yesterday it was also reported, and this goes to money, which I am very sensitive about because I know how hard taxpayers work for their money. Now, there was a trip to Arizona that I took in order to investigate how the state of Arizona conducted its audit. This is at the very beginning after I had been appointed, but importantly, before I had received any funding. And I asked two attorneys, Carol Mathias and Andrew Kloster, who agreed without expectation nor promise of compensation to accompany me. As I did with my trip to South Dakota to attend Mr. Lindell's symposium on all of the machines and supposed cyber attacks, which I have already mentioned, I do not have any evidence of. I told everybody concerned that although I am fronting the money, I am paying for it myself. I intend on seeking reimbursement if I'm ever funded. It was reported, so this reporter contacts Speaker Voss's spokesperson, Angela Joyce, who said something like this payment, this reimbursement for the travel expenses was not authorized and they're going to seek it back. You know, I'm confident that Ms. Joyce receives a lot of inquiries about a lot of different things, And at the moment she would have been approached by this particular individual who works for that newspaper, she would have been unaware of the First Amendment to my agreement to the contract, which has been previously disclosed under open records requests. It's dated August 20, 2021, and it tells us that I indeed have a travel budget of $25,000. I'm confident Ms. Joyce would not have been aware of that at the time she was approached. Although the original agreement with the Speaker's office called for all expenses of this investigation to be taken out of my $11,000 a month income, I knew from the get-go, and any reasonable person knows that that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. I think that was done in reflection that this was a rapidly evolving situation, and no one could anticipate the precise needs or expectations for even what this investigation was to find. By definition, you can't know that. But in any event, no one reached out, no one asked about this contract. The money is covered, the travel is covered. It was certainly not a pleasure trip. It was done for work. It was done so that I could learn. Arizona spent about $6 million on their forensic audit, their version of an investigation. I wanted to find out how I could avoid doing that for the people of Wisconsin while still finding out the truth of what happened. I never anticipated that the bulk of the money would have to go to lawyers, taxpayer-funded lawyers, to try to get government officials to cooperate by answering questions about what they did with government administration, taking private money and accepting personnel employed by private groups and corporations to administer public elections. Individuals from Chicago and New York City coming to Wisconsin, to Green Bay, to Madison, Milwaukee, and the others to administer the elections. And now the government officials responsible are spending tens and tens of thousands of dollars of public money to try to prevent me from asking them the questions about why they took the money and what they did with it. The disparity, they're two different hearings. The disparity in the focus and the treatment of the irresponsible waste of taxpayer money, occasioned solely by these government officials who want to avoid public accountability, is unsurprising but still disappointing. With all of that concluded, I have eliminated any reasonable criticism over any purported lack of transparency. That is everything. I and my office, we are ready to move forward with my demand, which is reflective of nothing more and nothing less than the reasonable expectation of every Wisconsin citizen, that every government official and every person who took part in administering public elections with Zuckerberg money and Zuckerberg employees now be held to a similar level of transparency so that they may be held accountable for any wrongdoing they engaged in. I am now happy to take your questions.
Jody, anybody else? Okay. Representative Emerson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I just want to clear up the record that Democrats on this committee did not refuse to meet with you. We refused to meet with you in private. We said we would be happy to meet with you in public, noticing it and inviting people in to listen to what you were saying. So let's just clear that up.
Well,
okay?
let's clear it up, Representative Emerson, if you'd like to. Last time I was here, I issued a sincere invitation to you to have a cup of coffee with me, which you, I thought, sincerely accepted. I must have been mistaken, because very rarely is an invitation for a cup of coffee impliedly a public event. If you had wanted to rent a public hall so people could watch us drink a cup of coffee, maybe you would have mentioned something at that time. But go ahead.
I'm just saying that I have a hard time believing what's coming out of your investigation and that it's not.
Tell me what you don't believe.
Excuse me, I have the floor.
Tell me what you
let's
don't
make
believe.
sure that we treat each other with respect.
Make sure that you're telling Justice Gableman that, because that was nothing but a bunch of disrespect, him yelling at me. And if this is how this is going to go, I'm done.
Well, I am asking you that you don't have to raise your voice in this committee.
He's the one that raised his voice first.
Let's be respectful, and remember, we have questions. Do you have any further questions, Representative?
I have several questions, thank you. But I would like to yield for right now.
Representative Spreitzer, do you have a few questions that you'd like to ask?
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't understand why it took until today to get the answers to a number of questions that were asked at the last committee and that members of the press, members of the public have been asking, but I do appreciate you finally bringing these answers to us. When you talk, though, about wanting transparency from the officials, mayors and clerks, it seems like they've been actually the ones asking for that transparency. And so I want to go back to the question we asked the last time you were before this committee. Are you willing to interview Mayor Genrich, Mayor Rhodes Conway in public and have the kind of transparency that you claim you're asking for, and have them answer questions before the entire public of Wisconsin so that everybody can understand what their role was and what their answers to your questions are?
You know, Mr. Spreitzer, I'd be in a lot better position to answer that question had it been posed by any of the mayors or any of the clerks of these 5 Zuckerberg cities or any of their numerous attorneys working on their behalf. For you see, those are all conditions that are commonly worked out between the parties themselves, not simply run and hide, turtle tuck, and stay silent. These are the kinds of conditions that the parties generally work out by themselves. Now, you are asking whether that is my plan, and currently it is not.
Well, I think that lack of transparency is concerning. But let me...
May I ask, and I apologize, but I just want to do a quick history lesson. We offered Mayor Genrich the entire month of May, to come on into this opportunity to explain many of these issues. We thought it would be the entire month, and he told the press that he had made a date, and that had never happened. So I just want to have a little history lesson about the opportunity that we had with at least Mayor Genrich after he called the last opportunity in March a Stalinist show trial, when you actually reach out to the mayor and say, we're inviting you in to hear your side of how these elections were held, and we never heard back. So I will allow you to go forward with your next question, Representative.
I want to turn to your staff, and I appreciate you sharing the names of all but one of them. But it does seem that paints some of the picture that my colleague, Rep. Emerson, was concerned about the last time you were before us, in terms of, are these people who have ties to either the Trump campaign or other Trump entities, or are these people who were actively involved in trying to change the results of the November 2020 election that you're investigating? And in particular, I want to ask you about Mr. Hoyer, because his group, the Wisconsin Voter Alliance, launched a failed lawsuit that tried to ignore the will of the voters and actually have the legislature pick the Electoral College delegates in 2020 for Wisconsin. And so given his role, given the role of people like Andrew Kloster and his connections with the Trump Organization, how can we take your investigations seriously? Don't we need, if you think the claims that you're investigating are real, if you are serious about this, shouldn't we bring in somebody who is above partisanship, above reproach, and have them get to the bottom of us? Because, sure, I'm a partisan. I'm elected with a D after my name. Everybody up here, except for Ledge Counsel, is a partisan. But so are you. So are many of the people who work for you. So isn't this just a extension of partisan activities trying to gin up a political base for the next election more than a legitimate investigation of the last election?
Okay. There's a lot there, Representative Spreitzer. Let me take it one at a time as I remember. My work and my employees will be judged by one thing, and that is the finished work product. And right now, what is preventing the finished work product is the fearful running and hiding of those government officials who do not want to be held accountable and who do not want to tell the public what they did with the Zuckerberg money and why they did it. You were kind enough a minute ago. I'm not worth a phone call, but I guess I'm worth speeches disguised as questions. You shared with me your, quote, concern, end quote, Representative Spreitzer. That's nice. I have a concern, and that is that after I have told you, after the nonpartisan Legislative Audit Bureau has told you that many broad, deep, systematic illegalities have continuously been conducted by the bureaucracy that's supposed to be in charge of overseeing the administration of our elections. I've told you that. The Legislative Audit Bureau has told you that. News reports are full. They have told you that. WEC themselves has told you that they engaged in unlawful, illegal conduct. And now you're concerned about some hypothetical purity. Guess what, Mr. Spreitzer? Pat Marley is, if he isn't here, he's listening. He and other liberal activists will soon be investigating every aspect, every detail of my employees' lives, professional lives. He will be reporting, no doubt, above the fold, everything about this. You will soon have all the answers to all of your purported concerns. When the real concern here, Mr. Spreitzer, Representative Spreitzer, the real concern here is, and I would think as someone who represents a district, your real concern would be, was the 2020 election rigged by partisan efforts by government officials using public money to get out the vote for a particular candidate? That's my concern.
If that's your concern, Mr. Gableman, the Legislative Audit Bureau came out with a report that, despite having a number of recommendations of what we can do better in the future, came to a fundamental conclusion that overall the election was safe and secure.
That was
not rigged.
Representative, I am going to say those words did not come out of the audit committee.
Well, they did come out of Senator Coles, who co-chairs the audit committee and is a Republican on your side of the aisle. And so
that is not what the audit committee said. As a matter of fact, when pressed on that issue, they made it entirely clear there is a clear difference between an audit and an investigation. We are now listening to an investigation. That has a completely different set of process. Auditors are actually look at the information that the government has provided. An investigation requires people to come forward with information that they have. So, do you have a further question,
I do.
Representative?
And my question gets to the heart of what the chair was just getting at, which is there is a huge distinction between looking at whether or not everything about the administration of an election went perfectly or whether anything should have been done differently or should be done differently in the future, versus suggesting that that election was rigged or that the outcome should be overturned or should have been overturned at some earlier point. And it seems that you are firmly in the lane of suggesting that the outcome of the election should have been overturned.
Now, I'm going to stop you right there, Mr. Spreitzer. I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth for your cheap political advancement. Stop it.
You hired
I
Mr.
never said
Hoyer.
anything about overturning any election.
You may-
Stop making things up, Mark.
Then why have you
Your
hired Mr.
constituents
Hoyer?
deserve better.
Why
So
have you
let's
hired
go on
Mr.
to your
Hoyer?
further-
Shame on you.
Why? Shame on you. Why have you hired Mr. Hoyer, who tried to overturn the will of the people of Wisconsin?
Representative, I am asking you, do you have a further question?
Yes, my question is, why do you feel it is appropriate to employ Mr. Hoyer, who specifically sued to overturn the will of the people of Wisconsin? Do you agree with him about that?
All right. I'm going to, once again, you make a lengthy speech, and then you wind up with a totally unrelated question. I'll get to Ron Hoyer in a second. But
I'd
first,
like you to get to him now.
yeah, I had to listen to you. You're going to listen to me. You said two words. You falsely said that I mentioned two phrases that I never mentioned. First of all, my argument is not that the election was not perfectly run, Mr. Spreitzer. I never said anything about perfect. I said, has it been, well, all right, let's really walk
You
this
suggested
out.
it's been rigged.
Has it been rigged? And what do we mean by rigged? What I mean is, did government officials use corporate money, which was transformed into public money, in an effort to help one candidate, to help get out the vote in favor of one candidate? I'm not arguing anything about perfect. And you use the euphemism that the LAB, and you misrepresent what the LAB report. It didn't say, oh, gee, there were some things we could have done differently or better. It may have said that, but the central thesis, which you are doing everything in your ability to avoid, is to say that WEC engaged in consistent and is still engaging to this day, Representative Spreitzer, in illegal conduct. Okay? Now let's get to the second phrase that you misrepresented what I said. I never said anything about overturning any election. That is not my interest. That is not my interest, Representative Spreitzer, and I don't know where you got that from, because the last time I was before this committee, I expressly said that the purpose of this investigation is not to overturn any election or to make a change in the presidency. I expressly said I am unaware of any legal mechanism by which that could be accomplished. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate that you don't think Representative Ramthan's resolution is a legal mechanism, but you are nevertheless employing people who tried to overturn the results of the election.
If we're going to interrupt each other when we don't like what the other person is saying or when a stray thought occurs to each other, I can do that too. But now I'm going to get to where you wound up in the last 5 seconds of your lengthy speech disguised as a question, which is about Ron Hoyer. Ron, I believe, is the president. He's the president of the Wisconsin Voters Alliance. They have been behind a lot of litigation that has been very successful. I note that it wasn't you, Representative Spreitzer, or any government official who went ahead to get open records which citizens of this state are lawfully entitled to, which concern these government officials, their direct communications with CTCL, the representatives who had all of the Zuckerberg money to come to town with and dish out. That is my knowledge about what Ron Hoyer has been doing, looking into the communications and the open records and the emails concerning the transactions of CTCL coming to these 5 cities with all sorts of Zuckerberg money, with all sorts of strings attached. That's my knowledge about Mr. Hoyer, who is, by the way, a fine and honorable man.
And my point is simply this, that...
Do you have a point or a question?
I do have a question.
Okay. And we are down to the last 10 minutes, so...
My question, Mr. Gableman, is if you wanted this investigation to have the appearance of legitimacy, if you wanted people to withhold judgment and wait for your final report, and then to have confidence in that final report, shouldn't you have avoided hiring people who sued to try to change the outcome of the past election? Shouldn't you have avoided hiring people with direct ties to the Trump organization? And frankly, shouldn't this investigation be headed up by somebody other than you? There has got to be some Republican in the state of Wisconsin, some Tommy Thompson type, that would be above reproach, that we would all, even the Democrats, say, you know what, we trust that that person is above board, that they may be a Republican, but they're out for the truth. And I don't trust that you're out for the truth, and I'm wondering why you haven't done more
Representative,
to...
you are just disparaging the person who's come in today, and I don't know
Mr. Gableman has disparaged himself by the people that he has put into this investigation.
Madam Chair, I now ask that his comments be stricken from the record. This is beyond the pale, and I will pack up my books and go if this is how it's going to be. I will not be subject to Mr. Spreitzer's lies and his frankly baseless accusations. That's not how this should go. You know better.
Thank you for coming in today. I have a question for you. Many of the groups that have come into the state of Wisconsin for the 2020 election, we have heard that there's been concerns about some of the people that you've hired may have some affinity.
May have what?
May have affinity to certain individuals. The National Vote at Home, a nonprofit, do you think they had an affinity?
I think it's very clear that Mark Zuckerberg's goal was to defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden.
Well,
he funded CTCL and the Vote at Home Alliance.
Okay.
And their local representative, a man from New York City called Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, who last time I was before this committee, I looked in the camera and I issued him an open invitation to come and talk with us.
We would love to have him come and visit Wisconsin again.
And so far, he has not accepted my invitation, and so we may be looking at more robust ways to secure his presence.
So do you think that these nonprofits that were funded by individuals who actually have a long history, CTCL, Hillary Hall has a long history, Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, a long history of Democrat Democrat backing, National Vote. How about QuickBase, again funded by the Zuckerberg Group, the Brennan Group? I'm sure you've seen many of the emails. Do you think that they have a party affiliation?
Yes.
Do you think that the Elections Group had a party affiliation that came and worked in Wisconsin?
Of course.
Do you think that USDR, that built all kinds of website and information, do you think, since they were funded by Zuckerberg, do you think they had party affiliation?
I hesitate only in that I do not know anything about anybody's party affiliation, but I do know that the intent of the Zuckerberg-funded groups was to help Joe Biden and help defeat Donald Trump.
How about Ideas 54?
I'm just not in a. You're mentioning these groups, and if I could swear under oath that I know about them, I would
No problem.
answer.
They were all funded by the Zuckerberg money that came to Wisconsin. So there were almost 14, maybe 18 different groups that came to Wisconsin under a nonprofit status that, did quite a few different things in the state. My last question to you is, you had started out and said that $100,000 was brought to the table for 5 communities,
Right.
and $50,000 went to one community and $10,000 went to each of the other communities to apply for a grant.
Right.
Is that a normal sequence of events?
I've never heard of it before.
To pay money to apply for a grant to the mayors? I know it didn't go to them individually.
I believe that's unusual, and I also believe it was unusual when the entire thrust of the so-called donation of the Zuckerberg groups went from helping to keep Wisconsin citizens safe from COVID, which is a very positive sounding thing. But then the minute that money is distributed, the minute the $100,000 is distributed, it then switched emphasis to a Get Out the Vote campaign.
Is Get Out the Vote campaign, is that something that usually government officials embark in?
I have never heard of that before, and I have serious questions, and I think everyone in the state has serious questions about that.
Any further questions? Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gableman, for being here. So it's interesting to me because you talked about outside of the city of Kenosha, you got very little cooperation from anyone else. So we have 4 major cities in the state that are non-cooperative. It just is mind-boggling to me that we have our friends from the press sitting over here in the corner. They seem to be only interested in you. I don't understand why they don't seem to have any curiosity at all about what's going on in these cities. They don't seem to ask any questions. They don't seem to bring this up at all. They don't, there's a hot story sitting there, and all they can say, oh, there's nothing to see. There's no evidence. It's kind of interesting because I'm trying to figure out how you have how you get evidence if you can't get people to testify. How are you going to do that?
If you can think of an answer to that, please let me know, Representative Murphy. I'd be all ears. But on a serious point, I'm afraid that the incuriosity of the traditional press stems from the fact that, by and large, they are very happy that with the results of the 2020 election, that Donald Trump was defeated and that Joe Biden was elected. Otherwise, nothing else would explain their lack of curiosity about holding government officials accountable. Here, the biggest newspaper in the state did a story about $2,700 or $2,750 of travel expenses for 3 lawyers to go down to Phoenix on our own. No one was paying us. No one was paying them. And they do that story, but then Mark Zuckerberg comes to 5 cities and spends $8.8 million, gives it to the mayors of those 5 cities, and then switches it midstream, mid negotiations from a COVID safety plan to a get out the vote campaign, which looks an awful lot like David Plouffe's roadmap to defeating Donald Trump, and Plouffe, of course, being employed by Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerberg. It seems like a very big and interesting story, but more importantly, one that the citizens of this state, from Beloit to Ashland and all places in between, deserve answers to.
Is your commission subject to open records law?
Is my investigation? Yes, but I have the right, as an ongoing investigation, and this goes back to a previous question that is an echo of another question which I answered thoroughly and in good faith the last time I was here, but apparently to no avail, about interviewing witnesses in public. That's crazy. Nobody does that as part of any investigation. If you do that, you could potentially compromise safety and security of witnesses. You certainly compromise the integrity of the investigation. That is the likelihood of getting at the truth. So my general response to your question, Representative, is yes. I believe I do have a duty to comply with open records. However, while the investigation is live, while it's going on, before I deliver my final report, I will not make public any records that might compromise the integrity of this investigation, that might hinder my ability to get at the truth. But all of those will be made public at the conclusion of my investigation.
All right. Do you mind if I continue just
Last one.
Okay. So I was rather surprised when Representative Spreitzer talked about people testifying in public or being interviewed in public in an investigation, because my first thought that would never happen. First of all, you have multiple people involved in these things. If one person can watch the other person being questioned, then they can tailor their questions accordingly. They get their stories together. I mean, isn't part of an investigation trying to get one person saying one thing, another person saying another thing, and then trying to get them to, or trying to reconcile,
And you know,
who's telling the truth. And
thank you, because as I recall, my answer to Representative Spreitzer the last time he asked that question at the first hearing, the first time I was here, was I really appreciate that question, for it gives me the opportunity to educate you about the fundamental bases of a successful investigation. However, I failed in my duty as an educator, at least as far as Representative Spreitzer goes, but the answer to your question is yes.
thank you, Madam Chairman. I would reserve the right to maybe ask a couple more questions later on.
You know, we started the hearing, and I know you were a few moments left, that we would make a 11 o'clock stop date.
Oh, I did not realize that.
The individuals have a couple of their appointments that they've been promised to, so we tried to keep this just to an hour.
Gotcha.
So that being said, we're going to adjourn this committee. Thank you for everybody who attended.
Thank you.
Oh, boy.
This program is a production.